This video will cover the genotype of Proto-Semites from a young Earth creation perspective. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. The Natufian Levantine origins of Proto-Semites is perhaps one of the best origins from a young Earth perspective. Proto-Semites would be the descendants of Natufians, and Proto-Semites would have expanded from the Levant, the homeland of Natufians. According to this book, In Hot Pursuit of Language and Prehistory, this paper makes an additional inference since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. And this is why I would say Natufians are the ancestors of Semites. Furthermore, the origins of Semites is in the Levant. The Bayesian phylogenetic analysis of Semitic languages identifies an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic in the Near East. Reading in yellow, it says, we estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, followed by an expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. So Semitic originated in the Levant region, the same place of the Natufian homeland. So as you can see on this map, to the left of your screen is the area of Natufian culture, and to the right of your screen is the spread and origins of Semites. Linguistically and geographically, the Levant origins of Semites is one of the best candidates according to academia. Another reason why a Natufian origin of Semites is plausible is because of genetics. Indigenous Middle Easterners have Levant PPNB slash Natufian DNA, PPNB standing for Pre-Pottery Neolithic B. So, this is from the Genomic History of the Middle East, and it says, Arabians and Bedouins are positioned close to ancient Levantines. When we substitute Levant Neolithic with Natufians as source of ancestry in the Levant, we found that Arabians could be successfully modeled. Arabians require additional ancestry from a Natufian-related population. So Natufians are seemingly a very close and good proxy for Arabians and Bedouins. And so it says Arabia has higher African and Natufian-like ancestries. In addition, our models suggest that Arabians could have derived their ancestry from Natufian-like local hunter-gatherer populations instead of Levantine farmers. And this is another paper dealing with the genome of the Middle East. It's called Projecting Ancient Ancestry in Modern Day Arabians and Iranians, a key role of the past exposed Arabo-Persian Gulf on human migrations, and it reads, also, the ancient Ibero-Maurusian specimens could be in part descendants of basal Eurasians, as they have a shared genetic affinity with early Haliocene Near Easterners. Best proxy are the Natufians, and 1/3 of input from sub-Saharan Africans, a mixture between West and East Africans. Thus, so far, Southwestern Asia is still the most plausible homeland for the hypothetical basal Eurasian population. So we do see that basically, essentially, when it comes to ancient Ibero-Maurusians, early Paleocene Near Easterners, they seem to all be somewhat connected, being a very similar people. And so here is a map showing the basal Eurasian area where they resided in, which was basically would have been around the area of the Persian Gulf. And then we see the Natufians in Levant on the map. And so just continuing the study, it says modern Saudi Arabian and Yemeni samples clustered tightly in a lower left quadrant overlapping with the three Natufian samples and were close to the Levant PPNB, pre-Pottery Neolithic B, and PPNC, pre-Pottery Neolithic C, and Levant Bronze Age samples. So modern day Saudi Arabians and Yemenis are very close to Natufians and Levantine populations from the Bronze Age to the PPNB period. So continuing, it says a part of the modern UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Oman samples were more dispersed and mingled with North African Ibero-Maurusian and North African early Neolithic in accordance to some sub-Saharan African input in their genomes. So we even see African DNA within these Arabian and Middle Eastern populations as well, specifically ancient North African Ibero-Maurusian. And so here is a chart that's going to show you the places and people with this DNA. So as we can see, when it comes to Natufian, it's a dark red. It's the red color. Typically in Yemen and Saudi Arabia, that's where we see the highest Natufian ancestry today. And also, we see Ibero-Maurusian DNA in Oman and the United Arab Emirates, highlighted in pink. And so here is also samples with Yemen and Saudi Arabians having Levant PPNB. And also here's a map so you can have a visualization. And this is from the study. So A, as you see, A deals with the Ibero-Maurusians. Typically, it is near this region of the Persian Gulf, near Oman, and basically the eastern side of Arabia. And then we have F. F is the Natufians. We see high amounts of Natufian ancestry on the western part of Arabia. And so when it comes to these samples, just showing you again that Natufian DNA or ancestry high in Yemen and Saudi Arabia, and Ibero-Maurusian DNA high in Oman and the United Arab Emirates. This is where we see the highest of this DNA in the Middle East. So 2/3 of the West Arab Persian populations have ancestry shared with the Natufian typical of the Levant. Similarly with the Ibero-Maurusian was higher in the east than in West Arab Persian Gulf, which we just saw in the map. The Ibero-Maurusian had a main signal in the Levant and West Arab Persian quadrant with a high Ibero-Maurusian Natufian similarity, followed by East Arab Persia, probably the basal Eurasian similarity. And so here's just a map showing you where you see this Natufian ancestry in Western Arabia is typically where you see it. And then you see the Ibero-Maurusian DNA over here. So now just to remind you what a Natufian genome consists of, this paper deals with it. The Natufian sample consisted of 61.2% Arabian, 21.2% North African, and 10.9% Western Asian, and 6.8% Omotic ancestry or Omotic ancestry. So that's the genetic makeup of a Natufian from an autosomal perspective. Since indigenous Middle Eastern populations have Natufian ancestry, we should know the Y-DNA haplogroups of Natufians. And to make a long story short, the Natufians had haplogroup E. Since Natufians are the ancestors of Proto-Semites, then they too would likely have haplogroup E, which they do. They would then spread from the Levant to Mesopotamia and other parts of the Middle East, such as Arabia, etc. Again, this paper makes an additional inference, since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. In this paper, dealing with the haplogroup of Natufians, Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus revealed core of West Eurasian ancestry. Such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. And this fits along exactly with the origins of Semitic languages. We estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, followed by an expansion of Akkadian in Mesopotamia. If Semites are descending from Natufians, and if Natufians have haplogroup E, then it's likely that these Semites coming from the Levant would also carry haplogroup E, such as the Akkadians. This paper deals with early Proto-Semites having haplogroup E. It's called Haplogroup E1b1b by DNA from EUpedia, and it says E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1b1b and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. And this fits exactly when Semites began to expand in the Levant, the early Bronze Age. And this is when you see these E markers. Furthermore, this paper deals with early Semites and Akkadians spreading throughout the Near East from the Levant. This paper is called How Eurasia Was Born, and it reads, the most plausible candidates for Semitic remigration to the Fertile Crescent with TMRCAs fitting the arrival of the Akkadians and other early Semitic peoples are certain subclades of both E-V22 and E-V12, with relatively early TMRCAs present in the Middle East could be candidates for such remigration, such as E-FGC14382. TMRCA was around 2200 BCE, and E-V3262, which is around 2600 BCE. So as we can see, everything is lining together perfectly, from the Natufians to Proto-Semites to Semites themselves having haplogroup E markers and spreading. So again, here is where we find ancient samples of haplogroup E in the Middle East. It's typically in the Levant, from the southern Levant to the northern Levant, the area of Natufian culture. And we can actually visually see haplogroup E markers spreading from the Levant into Mesopotamia, bringing Semitic languages as read earlier. E-M34 is Epio-Paleolithic, which puts the divergence time of its major subclades E-L791 and E-M84 around the glaciochronological estimated dawn of Proto-Semitic in the Chalcolithic or early Bronze Age. As E-M34 was found in Bronze Age Armenian samples, is it possible that Semitic or Afroasiatic languages were spoken in Armenia and/or the Caucasus at some point? That's actually a very important point. So far, we have two E-M884 samples, RISE 416 and RISE 423, from Nerikin Gestan in Armenia, which date back to the Middle Bronze Age. Given the age of these samples, it's possible these individuals' paternal ancestors hailed from neighboring Mesopotamia and arrived in the region with Assyrian traders, who in turn were descendants from the Akkadians. This might hold true for at least one of the two samples. So we have found haplogroup E samples as far north of the Near East as Armenia, and it's possible that it could have been brought by Akkadians. And as we read earlier, Akkadians did have E markers. So everything is starting to line up. Natufians, Jordanians, Ethiopian Amhara, Ethiopian Jews, Sahara and Mauritania, Algerians, Ethiopians, Yemeni, Ethiopian Oromo, Turkish, Omanic, and Bedouins. What is needed to verify or falsify the hypothesis of the E-M34 as Akkadian is its distribution among Iraqi and Kurdish populations, and especially ancient DNA from skeletons found in scientific excavations of Akkadian sites in Mesopotamia. E-M78 was a major founding lineage of West Semitic people and North Egyptian lower classes, slaves, workers, shepherds. E-M78 is an indicator of a second wave out of Africa of Proto-Semitic people during the early Bronze Age. This most definitely was not just one haplogroup, but included many. Why DNA E-M78 is a good migration indicator for this second wave. A significant majority of Jewish families with traditions of descent from King David are found in E-M78, a lineage that underwent a severe ancient extinction event in the conquest, exilic, and Roman periods. History indicates that there would have been very few survivors of this lineage, but a discussion that belongs to a different thread, though. So, this paper actually deals with one of the oldest Jewish families who claim descent from King David. It's called Why DNA Research Studies of Rabbinical Lineages and Their Importance to Jewish Genealogy. This was by Dr. Jeffrey Mark Paul. And it says, the Laura rabbinical lineage has one of the oldest family trees in the world, claiming to trace back at least to King David, born 1037 BCE. The first Laura in the lineage of Rabbi Aaron Laura, 1400 through 1480, who married Miriam Speria, the daughter of Rabbi Shlomo Speria, the founder of the Shlomo rabbinical lineage. We tested two pedigreed paternal descendants of the Laura rabbinical lineage, whose common ancestor was Rabbi Jacob Aaron Lori of Mavov, 1753 through 1788. The predicted haplogroup to which the two pedigreed Laura descendants belong is E-M35. The confirmed haplogroup is awaiting the results of a big Y700 test. The previous nomenclature for this haplogroup, E1b1b1, was cited for Lori's descendants of Rabbi Jechiel Lori, 1435 through 1490. The two Lori descendants have an average of 29 genetic matches at 37 STR markers, representing 21 different surnames for geologically relevant genetic matches. 34/37 STR markers. The 95% probability predicted for the TMRCA is within 8 generations. So basically, one of the oldest family trees in the world claiming descent back to King David has haplogroup E. That's very, very interesting. And just to go further into that, when it comes to various Jewish groups with haplogroup E, it is quite common. E-M215 and E-M35 are quite common among Afro-Asiatic speakers. The linguistic group and carriers of E-M35 lineage have a high probability to have arisen and dispersed together from the Afro-Asiatic homeland. Amongst populations with an Afro-Asiatic speaking history, a significant portion of Jewish male lineages are E-M35. Haplogroup E-M35, which accounts for approximately 18% to 20% of Ashkenazi and 8.2% to 30% of Sephardi Y chromosomes, appears to be one of the major founding lineages of the Jewish population. And so just doing further reading on various Jewish groups with haplogroup E. All paternal descendants of the Whitmire Gitterman rabbinical lineage share the L117 SNP of Y-DNA haplogroup E, previously described as E-M35, E-M35 and E1b1b1 in the literature. Y-DNA characteristic that all descendants of the Wertham-Gitterman rabbinical lineage share is that they belong to the E-L117 haplogroup. According to the International Society of Genealogy, ISOGG, the ISOGG and National Geographic's Genographic Project, E1b1b1, may have arisen instead in the Near East or the Middle East and then expanded into the Mediterranean with the spread of agriculture. Haplogroup E-M35, which accounts for approximately 18 to 20% of Ashkenazi and 8.6% to 30% of Sephardi Y chromosomes, appears to be one of the major founding lineages of Jewish populations. It is the most prevalent haplogroup among the Jewish population outside of haplogroup J. Samaritan communities have traditions of descending from the tribe of Levi, suggesting that the E1b1b1 men claiming to be Levites may have existed in Israel before the diaspora of 70 AD or CE. So, dealing with the Samaritans now we dealt with people claiming descent from King David, and then we dealt with just the general Jewish population, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, etc. Now let's deal with the Kohanim and the Levites. So the priestly Kohanim lineage from the tribe of Levi, the Samaritan family, let's look at them. It says, however, the biggest and most important Samaritan family, the Kohanim family, tradition, tribe of Levi, was found to belong to haplogroup E. This article predated the change of the classification of haplogroup E3b1-M78 to E3b1a-M78 and the further subdivision of E3b1a-M78 into 6 subclades based on the research of Kohanim. Now this of course is very powerful information from what we gathered. Various Jewish groups have this haplogroup E. And of course, with the Levites, if they are E markers, then of course we go from Levi to Jacob to Isaac and then to Abraham. So it's likely that Abraham could have had an E marker as well. If we have people from the line of King David and various normal Jewish populations and Levites having these E markers. Here's a chart actually showing it. Samaritan Levites have haplogroup E at 100%. And again, this is Samaritan Levites. Here are the references. And of course, they're not the only Semitic populations with E. Arabs in Egypt have E up to 36% to 62%, as well as Arabs in Palestine who have it at 31%, and Arabs in the Jordan have it at 31%. So this is very telling. As far as the discussion above, the Natufian ancient DNA tested into E-P2 and E-Z830 is the strongest link we have to the origins of East Semitic, as per my hypothesis above, and would then suggest E-P2, E-Z830, E-M123, and E-M34 are the founding Y-DNA haplogroups of Akkadian and East Semitic, which I will agree. So, many modern Middle Easterners still carry haplogroup E. I think this is important to know. It's the second or third most highest haplogroup in the Middle East. Haplogroup E is common in the Mediterranean as well. But the expansion of haplogroup E from the Levant and the expansion of Semitic languages from the Levant perfectly match one another. And we'll make this clear again. When Semites began to expand from the Levant, it does perfectly overlap with, the migration of haplogroup E throughout the Middle East and even into Africa. And again, just showing you the spread of haplogroup E going into Mesopotamia. And here are all the Middle Eastern populations with haplogroup E today. You see it in Christian or Arabs, you see it in Assyrians, you see it in just all these various groups. And again, you see it also around the Mediterranean peoples of today. And again, I'm just reiterating that E is definitely in the Middle East, both in ancient times and it's still seen in the descendants today, such as this E marker, which was 4,600 years ago. And it perfectly matches what we see with E markers expanding exactly around the same time Semites did. And so this is basically the best candidate for Semites, Proto-Semites. E-M34 lineages experienced a much more dramatic expansion during the Chalcolithic Copper Age period. Also downstream of CTS1096, the Y14891 and Z21018 clades are typically found among people of Jewish ancestry, while PF6391 and Z21421 are found in the Levant, specifically Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and the Arabian Peninsula. F1382 appears to have expanded during the Iron Age from the Levant to the Arabian Peninsula, where it is exclusively found today. And so here is, by the way, a chart from the genomic history of the Middle East showing various E markers. Again, we see E in Iraqi populations. We see it in Yemeni, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and we see a lot of E samples in Yemen, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, as well as in Jewish populations like Uzbekistan Jews, and Bedouins in the Negev of Israel, Christian Arabs in Israel. So again, E has definitely had a very ancient and long presence in the Middle East, and it's still seen today. So if you want to know more modern populations with haplogroup E and that have connections to Natufians, I advise that you look up the familytreedna.com, Natufians DNA, Y-DNA classic chart. So basically, what this is, for genealogy within the most recent 15 generations, STR markers help define paternal lineages. Y-DNA STR markers change, mutate often, that most men who share the same STR results also share a recent paternal lineage. This page displays Y chromosome DNA STR results for the project. It uses the classic format. The columns display each project member's kit number, paternal ancestry information according to project settings, the paternal tree branch haplogroup, and actual STR marker results. So again, if you want to know the what modern Middle Eastern populations have haplogroup E and connections to Natufians, again, type in familytreedna.com, Natufians DNA, Y-DNA classic chart. And I took some screenshots, and there's so many long pages that you can just keep clicking and to see. But I just took a few screenshots just for you guys to hopefully look at this. So here is like E markers in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in the Jordan, Saudi Arabia. You see a lot in the United Arab Emirates right here, a lot in Saudi Arabia, a lot in Iraq, and the Kuwait. You see a lot of Saudi Arabian E markers, a lot of Yemeni E markers. So again, these are modern Middle Eastern populations with haplogroup E. Here are a lot of Yemeni and Saudi, a lot of Yemeni right here. Here's a lot of Saudi. Here's a lot of Saudi as well. Here's a bunch of Iraq. Here is a mixture of Iraq and Saudi and United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. And like I said, here's a lot of Yemeni. So modern Middle Easterners most definitely have haplogroup E and connections to Natufians. Here's a lot of Lebanon. Here's a lot of Iraq. Here's a lot of Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And here's a bunch of Saudi Arabia and more Saudi Arabia. Here's Oman, a lot of Oman, a lot of Yemen. Here's a bunch of Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So yes, Haplogroup E is definitely present in the Middle East. It is quite expensive. So here is just one map showing one branch of Haplogroup E, E-M123, and there are various branches of Haplogroup E. Keep that in mind. I'm just showing you one branch, and this is E-M123 again, where you see a very high concentration, specifically starting from the Levant, going down to the western part of Arabia into southern Arabia, and then you see it all the way in parts of Anatolia, Iraq, and Syria, even in Iran. So yes, there's definitely E in the Middle East, and kind of fits with the Semitic language map. If you look at Haplogroup E and look at the Semitic map, there's a perfect overlap. You can really see how the people are one and the same. So even from a young Earth perspective, I would still see an African influence in the genetic makeup of Proto-Semites if they descend from Natufians. After all, remember their genetic makeup. The Natufian sample consists of 61.2% Arabian and 21.2% North African. So, Natufians still had some African DNA, North African or Ibero-Maurusian. And, they had 10.9% West Asian and 6.8% Omotic ancestry, which is another African population. So keep in mind, again, with the genomic history of the Middle East, they say Arabia has higher African and Natufian-like ancestries. So, just keep this in mind. And again, from this paper, projecting ancient ancestry in modern-day Arabians and Iranians, a key role of the past exposed Arabo-Persian Gulf and human migrations. Also, the ancient Ibero-Maurusian specimens could be in part descendants of basal Eurasians, as they have a shared genetic affinity with early Paleocene Near Easterners. Best proxy are the Natufians, and 1/3 of input from sub-Saharan Africans, a mixture between West and East Africans. So there's definitely an African input within the ancient Middle Eastern populations. Modern Saudi Arabian and Yemeni samples cluster tightly with the lower left quadrant overlapping with the three Natufian samples, and were close to the Levant's PPNB and PPNC and Levant's Bronze Age samples. A part of the modern UAE or United Arab Emirates and Oman samples were more dispersed and mingled with North African Ibero-Maurusian and North African early Neolithic, in accordance to some sub-Saharan input in their genomes. So again, there is a African presence within Middle Eastern populations. So from a young Earth creation perspective, Proto-Semites would be partly African and also partly Asiatic, a perfect blend of Asia and Africa. Basically, they would be Afroasiatic, which is another reason why Natufians are a perfect fit, because Natufians are Afroasiatics, or at least they're Proto-Afroasiatics. Furthermore, this Semitic and Hamitic union makes sense from a Hebraic or biblical perspective, since according to the scriptures, it was often Semitic men getting with Hamitic women. With that being said, I believe Eber and Azurad's union, mentioned in the Book of Jubilees, matches this perfectly. Book of Jubilees, chapter 8 says, Eber, and he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad. And Azurad took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod. She bare him a son, and called his name Peleg. And if you look at the genealogy, basically you have Eber descending from Shem, a Semite, and then Azurad descending from Ham, specifically from Cush, a Hamite. You have this union of a Shemitic and a Hamitic getting together, creating, Peleg and the various Semitic peoples that would descend from Peleg and Eber. So keep in mind, the Book of Jubilees mentions that the name Nimrod, the Greek form of Nimrod, only as being the father of Azurad, the wife of Eber and mother of Peleg. This account would thus make Nimrod, again, who is a Cushite Hamite, an ancestor of Abraham, and hence all Hebrews. Genesis chapter 10. Cush begot Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. So just keep that in mind. And just to remind you who the Cushites are, according to my research, the Cushites will be a Proto-Nilotic people and a Nilo-Saharan Sudanic people, because of course Cush, son of Ham, settled in Sudan. Now let's actually read the evidence for this. A Proto-Nilotic unity, separate from an earlier undifferentiated Eastern Sudanic unity, is assumed to have emerged by the 3rd millennium BC. The Eastern Sudanic unity must have been considerably earlier still, perhaps around the 5th millennium BC. The original locus of the early Nilotic speakers was presumably east of the Nile in what is now South Sudan. The Proto-Nilots of the 3rd millennium BC were pastoralists, while the neighbors, the Proto-Central Sudanic peoples, were mostly agriculturalists. Nilotic people practice a mixed economy of cattle pastoralism, fishing, and seed cultivation. The genetic and linguistic studies have demonstrated that Nubian people in northern Sudan and southern Egypt are a admixed group that started off as a population closely related to Nilotic people. Nubians are considered to be the descendants of the early inhabitants of the Nile Valley, who later formed the kingdom of Kush, which included Kerma and Meroe, and the medieval Christian kingdoms of Mercia, Nubotia, and Almodi. These studies suggest that populations closely related to Nilotic people long inhabited the Nile Valley as far as southern Egypt in antiquity. And so, just to go into the phenotype of Nilots and where they resided, it says specialized African type native to the swamps and savannas of the Upper Nile region in South Sudan and adjacent countries. With their black skin, they belong to the darkest people on earth. Long heads, facial features coarse with a narrow, wide nose, full lips, and kinky hair. Nilots seem to be a relatively old group that might have expanded further east into Ethiopia during prehistoric times. And if indeed Nilots, Nilo-Saharans, and Nubian Sudanese peoples, if they do truly descend from Cush, son of Ham, then it's likely that they would have had haplogroup A, as you can see on the map down below. Haplogroup A is still extremely high and present in Sudan and other parts of Africa. So these are the Cushites from the son of Ham. So dealing with the mitochondrial DNA, though, this is where things get interesting. An mtDNA study by Casti in 2008 examined the mitochondrial ancestry of various Nilotic populations in Kenya, Turkana, Samburia, Maasai, and Luau individuals sampled. The mtDNA of almost all of the tested Nilots belong to various sub-Saharan micro-haplogroup L subclades, including L0, L2, L3, L4, and L5. And the L2 is where our interest is, because L2 has been found in the ancient Near East, specifically in Syria. So it says haplogroup L2A1 has been found in ancient fossils associated with the pre-Pottery Neolithic culture at Tel Halil, Syria. A specimen examined at the Savannah Pastoral Neolithic site of Oxmanda in Tanzania also carried the L2A1 clade. Admixture clustering analysis further indicated that the individual bore significant ancestry from the ancient Levant. And that is extremely interesting. And so this fits along with, a mixture between Africans and Asiatics, because this book covers it. First farmers, the origins of the origins of agricultural societies. And it reads, Saharan people would have met and mixed with the descendants of the Southwest Asian Neolithic populations, which would be Natufians, responsible for the introduction of the Southwest Asian agricultural tradition into the Nile Valley about 1,500 years earlier. The resulting amalgam was later to develop into one of the most remarkable civilizations of the ancient world, a true synthesis of the Oriental, the Easterner, and the African. So we do see from academia that there was an admixture between Asiatic and African populations in ancient times, and so this book also deals with it, ancestral journeys, the peopling of Europe from the first ventures of the Vikings by Jane Mankeo. And so it says one language family is clearly linked to the spread of farming from the Near East. The Afro-Asiatic family includes ancient Egyptian and other languages that appear in early written records, such as Akkadian in Mesopotamia. There is a genetic hint of arrivals from Africa. The African mtDNA L2A1 has been found at the farming settlement of Tel Halil in Syria at the pre-pottery level. Why DNA E1b1b1 across both the north and south coasts of the Mediterranean is a clue that it was the male partner of L2A1. Then the subclades of E1b1b1 spread to helped E1b1b1 helped to spread farming around the Mediterranean. So we do see that back then Haplogroup E and L2 they would have been mixing with each other, and just like from the other source, this is your Eastern and African admixture. And just dealing a little bit deeper with L2 and the people who have it today, L2A1C1 has a North African origin. It is observed in Tunisia, Sephardic, Ashkenazi, Jews, Hebrews, Moroccans, Egyptians, Nubians, and Yemenis. And of course, that's not surprising because, again, haplogroup L2 has been found in ancient fossils associated with the pre-pottery Neolithic culture at Tel Halil, Syria. So we most definitely find various Near Eastern populations today with haplogroup L2A1. Furthermore, L2A1, L2A is recognized as an Ashkenazic specific haplogroup seen amongst Ashkenazi Jews with ancestry in Central and Eastern Europe, where it is presumed to have come from Ashkenazi admixture. And this study kind of deals with it. 60,000 years of interaction between Central and Eastern Africa documented by major African mitochondrial haplogroup L2. So it says L2A1 is the most complex subclade within L2A, and it harbors lineages from all African regions as well as lineages from other continents, including non-African branches such as L2A112A connected to Ashkenazi Jewish diaspora. L2A1A has clearly a Western/Central African origin and distribution, with many subclades suggesting a recent Bantu migration southward and is hardly present in Eastern Africa. L2A11 displays a similar pattern in sub-Saharan Africa, but was the particularity of a sub-branch present in Ashkenazi Jewish L1 L L2A112A. The clade L2A1 plus 143 shows several basal Eastern African lineages together with Near Eastern and Arabian lineages that indicate a migration in the early Paleocene. And of course, the early Paleocene would have been around the time of the Natufians. So it's very interesting how we do see these L2A1 markers being in Near Eastern and Arabian populations as far back as that. This paper also deals with Ashkenazi Jews with haplogroup L2A. So it's called The History of Slavics Inferred from Complete Mitochondrial Genome Sequences, and it says haplogroup L2A is widespread within Africa. Both of them could be assigned to the L2A1 L2A clade and located on the same branch with the Ashkenazi Jewish haplotype. The L2A1 haplotypes are observed in Germany, Romania, France, Russia, and Poland, as L2A haplotypes were reported in Ashkenazi Jewish populations. The samples representing haplogroup L2A1L2A might be further evidence of the occurrence of Ashkenazi Jewish mtDNAs in Polish mtDNA pool. So, Eber descendants, the Joktonites, would also be the first people to inhabit Arabia. Joktonites are considered to be pure Arabians in Arab traditions, and genetically indigenous Arabian groups with the same name and geographical location have high amounts of Natufian ancestry and, of course, haplogroup E. According to Genesis chapter 10, verse 24 through 31, to Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan begot Almodad, Shelef, Hazarath, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Obel, Abumel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Joab. All these were the sons of Joktan, and their dwelling place was from Misha as you go toward Sephar, the mountain of the east. And Misha would be in the area of the Jordan and the Levant, and Sephar would be in Yemen, near southern Arabia. And this would actually fit the migration of Semites going from the Levant into southern Arabia, bringing their southern Arabian branch of Semitic languages. And again, this will fit with haplogroup E going into Arabia and into the southern Levant. And when we look at DNA, the people in Yemen and Saudi Arabia actually have the highest amounts of Natufian DNA. Again, Natufians, they originated in the Levant, so they would have migrated into Arabia. And here is where they would have been on the western side of the Arabian Peninsula. Furthermore, this is also where we see a nice concentration of haplogroup E in Arabia, typically on the western side of Arabia, where we see again high concentrations of Natufian ancestry. And just to remind y'all of the Arab tradition of Joktan, Yaktun, Quaktun, and Koktun, Joktan's descendants are called Joktonites. There is an Arab tradition that Joktan was the ancestor/progenitor of all the purest Arabian tribes of Central and Southern Arabia. According to ATS Bible Dictionary, Joktan, son of Eber, and by him connected with the Hebrews and other Shemitic families, he is believed to be the Koktun or Yaktun to whom Arabian writers trace their purest and most ancient genealogies. Also, according to Easton's Bible Dictionary, there is an Arab tradition that Joktan, or Arab Koktun, was the progenitor of all the purest tribes of Central and Southern Arabia. So it's interesting how these ancient, pure Arabians, Joktonites, basically reside in the region where we see haplogroup E and high Natufian ancestry, the southern Levant, the southern Arabia and Central Arabia. So I don't think this is a coincidence. Yemen, Saudi Arabia, high amounts of Natufian DNA, as y'all can see on this chart. And again, Natufians showing you these peoples, Saudis, Yemenis, as well as Bedouin B and Qatari. They have a lot of the Natufian DNA. This is from the genetic history of the Middle East. And again, Arabians and Bedouins are positioned close to ancient Levantines. That fits perfectly with Joktonites migrating from the Levant going into Arabia. And when we substitute Levant Neolithic with Natufians as source of ancestry in the Middle East, we found that Arabians could be successfully modeled. And I think that fits perfectly with Joktonites. Arabians require additional ancestry from a Natufian related population. And again, Modern Saudi Arabian and Yemeni samples clustered tightly with the lower left quadrant overlapping with the 3 Natufian samples and were close to the Levant PPNB and the PPNC and the Levant Bronze Age samples. 2/3 of the West Arab Persian population have ancestry shared with the Natufian, typical of the Levant. As we can see, Jokhtonites and indigenous Arabians perfectly fit one another. But why is this important? Because Joktan is the son of Eber, and Joktan is the brother of Peleg, and Peleg is the ancestor of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joktanite Arabians would technically be the closest and oldest ethnic group we could look at to understand the genetic makeup of Abraham and the Israelites. From the looks of things, I would expect them to have Natufian ancestry and haplogroup E, both of which are ancestral to Semites. As we can see, here's the genealogy, just as a reminder. Eber begot Joktan and Peleg, and Joktanites would be the closest ethnic group from the lineage of our facsad that Abraham would be linked to, would be the Joktanites. So Joktanites are a very good key at looking at when it comes to the, what will be the genome of Abraham and his Y DNA as well as autosomal DNA. So the genome of the Israelites from the Semitic side, both ancient and modern, would be Levant PPNB Natufian and ancient North African Ibero-Mauritian ancestry. Also, the paternal lineage will be haplogroup E. The genetic makeup of the Israelites should look similar to the Arabians, the most ancient and closest relatives to Abraham and Israel. So therefore, again, it will be Natufian Levant, which would be the Asiatic side, and African, North African, and with some Sub-Saharan African, as well as haplogroup E. This is what I'll look for the ancient Israelite Semitic side, and when it comes to the descendants of Israel, they should have some Natufian, some Ibero-Mauritian, and haplogroup E. To some degree, I would expect, the descendants of Israel to have this, genetic makeup. Have to have, again, some Natufian, some Ibero-Mauritian, and the paternal lineage being haplogroup E. This is what I would look for according to all the information, given thus far. With that being said, this is where we conclude the video, the genome of Proto-Semites from a young Earth perspective. And the next video is the phenotype of Proto-Semites from a young Earth perspective. And with that being said, have a great day. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video, share it, click the bell, and leave a comment for further information. And with all that out of the way, shalom.